Apologies to the Grand Inquisitor from the brothers Karamazov, but The Pale Criminal is my favorite passage in all of literature. This is Nietzsche at his finest, penetrating X-ray vision into the sociology, psychology, and psyche of human beings. The Pale Criminal anticipates entire schools of thought, from Freud's psychoanalysis, Heidegger's views on guilt, to Foucault's take on justice. Startlingly original, seminal, and pound for pound the juiciest thing I've ever read in my life. Ye do not mean to slay, ye judges and sacrifices, until the animal hath bowed its head. Out of his eye speaketh the great contempt. The picture I'm visualizing here is a bloodied person being dragged into the center of the king's court, awaiting decision on their upcoming fate. The reason they're referred to, I think, in the quote as an animal and not a human being is because for Nietzsche, in the eyes of the court, a human being is simply an animal that still needs domesticating. They want the raw, unbridled freedom within him tamed. Not removed entirely, as he does say, ye do not mean to slay, but shaped and molded as per the court's requirement, which leads me to believe that punishment is less about correcting the individual, even though we have whole-ass institutions that pride themselves in being correctional services, and more about submission. Great contempt, as Nietzsche put it, is spoken out of the eye of the accused. He kneels before the state because he's powerless. What else can he do? Outwardly, he's bowing his head, as we all would in that situation, but internally he holds increasingly greater disdain for the moral and legal systems that put him there. A deeper exploration and expansion of this idea is undertaken in Michel Foucault's renowned work, Discipline and Punish. In it, he writes about how the true intention of the court isn't punishment, it's about staging obedience. For the longest time, punishment was simply public theater. People would come from far and wide to see the criminal quartered or even boiled to death, cheering it on. But as the state grew more sophisticated, it realized this is simply an inefficient use of resources. Under the guise of humanitarianism, they changed paths. From being an art of unbearable sensations, punishment has now become an economy of suspended rights. In his acclaimed work, The Genealogy of Morals, Nietzsche writes, I have cautiously indicated the continually growing spiritualization and deification of cruelty, which pervades the whole history of the higher civilization, and in the larger sense even constitutes it. At any rate, the time is not so long past when it was impossible to conceive of royal weddings and national festivals on a grand scale, without executions, tortures, or similarly to conceive of an aristocratic household without a creature to serve as a butt for the cruel and malicious baiting of the inmates. The sight of suffering does one good. The infliction of suffering does one more good. This is a hard maxim, but nonetheless a fundamental maxim. Old, powerful, and human or too human. One, moreover, to which perhaps even the apes as well would subscribe. For it is said that in inventing bizarre cruelties they are giving abundant proof of their future humanity, to which, as it were, they are playing the prelude. Without cruelty, no feast, so teaches the oldest and longest history of man, and in punishment too there is so much of the festive. Hearken, ye judges, there is another madness besides, and it is before the deed. So by the late 19th century, academics and institutions were getting on board with the idea that not all of human behavior was entirely under conscious control. People like Charcot were conducting public demonstrations on hypnosis in France, aiming to illustrate how easily reason can be bypassed when there's a stronger, more primal drive. People were learning that what we call reasons are just after-the-fact stories we tell ourselves and each other for coherence. Society became increasingly obsessed with the thought that crimes weren't the free acts of rational agents. Hidden drives or pathologies were in the driver's seat and well out of our control. Topics like criminal anthropology became genuine fields of study. Basically, I'm trying to paint a picture of the cultural atmosphere at the time of Nietzsche's writing. Today we most readily associate people like Freud as being the progenitor of the unconscious as an idea or a tool to uncover or discover ourselves. But when Nietzsche claims that there is a madness besides the deed itself, and it is before the deed, that's exactly the kind of milieu and atmosphere he's absorbing from and synthesizing in his writing. Thus speaketh the red judge. Why did this criminal commit murder? He meant to rob. I tell you, however, that his soul wanted blood, not booty. He thirsted for the happiness of the knife. So the judge decrees that the person brought on trial was trying to rob, and in doing so committed murder, which Nietzsche sharply refutes. He says that it's too simplistic to posit the accused, now the criminal, as a rational, self-serving being trying to rob so that he could have money. Yes, if he was successful in his robbery, he would have money, but that's not why he was robbing, according to Nietzsche. And this is where it gets uncomfortable for modern readers. Something gaining traction at the time of Nietzsche's writing was the idea of inherited traits. We now have Darwin come to mind in the 21st century when we say that phrase, but I don't know if he came up with it. The point is that behavior isn't simply a matter of choosing from options freely, but instead arises from inheritances out of our ancestry and heritage. This has unsettling implications for many people who think that this is racial determinism, and ideas like this are just asking to be hijacked. But something modern liberalism doesn't seem to be able to integrate is that people just aren't born as blank slates. It seems a false dichotomy to posit that because the environment someone is born in and grows up in plays a role in shaping them, because of that, innate characteristics, temperaments, physiology, and genes simply don't exist. Now I want to direct your mind to the notorious case of the Texas Tower sniper Charles Whitman. In 1966, this guy went on a killing spree in the University of Texas, but not before leaving notes about how he wasn't sure why he was doing this. He had debilitating headaches for periods leading up to this, usually accompanied with inexplicable bloody imagery in his head. So he requested that his brain be studied after his death so that they could get to the root cause of his experience. And the story goes that, sure enough, a tumor was found in the hypothalamus, pressing against his amygdala. But just a quick tangent for context, the amygdala is your brain's emotional control center and part of the wider limbic system, so it's directly conditioned for your survival. Of course, if it gets affected or impacted negatively in some way, it can lead to dysregulated emotions. And uncharacteristic or uncontrolled aggression is a common outcome, same as the case with Charles Whitman. So all of this begs the question, is he this great evil person or is he an unfortunate victim himself? Ask the families of the murdered and you'll get a very different answer to the families of people who suffer with brain tumors like him. Now, some of you will feel sympathy for Whitman, but probably only because we luckily have the science to do an autopsy to discover the tumor. What about the millions of undiscovered mechanisms in the brain we still know nothing about? Think about the phrases we use in our everyday language, like, no one in their right mind could do that. So what we today are calling psychotic, despicable behavior could just be an as yet undiscovered brain pathology. So back to the pale criminal. In continuation with the idea that part of our human nature is governed or determined by factors well outside of our control, that uncomfortable implication resurfaces once again. Maybe the criminal killed because it's in his nature to kill. Maybe he likes the sight and the sound and the smell of spilled blood, destruction and violence. Maybe it's just a natural nature thing. But his weak reason understood not this madness, and it persuaded him. What matter about blood, it said. Wishest thou not at least to make booty thereby, or take revenge? So his reason isn't as developed as his instinctual drive, so he gives us, and perhaps more importantly, he gives himself, a reason conforming to societal norms. He tells himself, I killed for material gain. The final point I want to make here is a simple but a cynical one. So at any given time in the eyes of the ruling class or the lawmakers, some people have to be categorized as evil because otherwise there's a whole other category of people that can't pride themselves on being good. Someone somewhere has to be killed because if he's not evil, what of our good? And finally, there is also the prison industrial complex. Some people justly or unjustly just have to be incarcerated because we're trying to make a little money here.
Am I gonna fucking sit here? What am I gonna go preach on a fucking mountain? We gotta make a little money here.
Remember Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment? The main character, Raskolnikov, is jaded with life and disdainful of those around him. He goes on to commit a murder only to be tormented by guilt for the majority of the book, realizing that his utilitarianism and hubris in thinking he's got the personality type to be ultra-moral or super-moral was completely wrong. Now, consider these lines from The Pale Criminal. But one thing is the thought, another thing is the deed, and another thing is the idea of the deed. The wheel of causality doth not roll between them. An idea made this pale man pale. Adequate was he for his deed when he did it, but the idea of it he could not endure when it was done. Evermore did he now see himself as the doer of one deed. Madness, I call this. The exception reversed itself to the rule in him. Raskolnikov drives himself to despair, thinking he's a murderer. He is, but isn't he an infinity of other things too? He's a brother, he's a son, he's a tutor, a debtor, a writer, a lover, or at least a wannabe lover. Yet he associates himself evermore as the doer of that one deed, of murder. Something he spent less than 1% of his time on this planet doing is now the entire object of his fixation. Like Charles Whitman, forever etched beside his name are the words mass murderer. The exception has become the rule. Now, Nietzsche isn't saying murder doesn't have consequences or shouldn't have consequences, but the tragedy is that our consciousness locks onto this one deed and builds our entire identity around it. That's the madness, lambasting someone who is a different version of the very mix of drives that you are. What happened to our tolerance that we speak ad nauseum of? What is this man? A mass of diseases that reaches out into the world through the spirit. There they want to get their prey. What is this man? A coil of wild serpents that are seldom at peace amongst themselves, so they go forth apart and seek prey in the world. There's a lot more I actually want to cover, but I'll end with the last line in this passage. I am railing alongside the torrent. Whoever is able to grasp me may grasp me. Your crutch, however, I am not. To me, it's clear that Nietzsche doesn't want to position Zarathustra as a prophet in the traditional sense and deify him. Take his ideas, learn from them if they help you, discard them if not. In the torrent that is life, he is not here to be your crutch, as he puts it, but only a railing. He is temporary support, but not something to create a collective religion out of. One repays a teacher badly if one always remains only a pupil. This stuff is cool, but seriously, get over it, it's a book.